Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the College Sports Hive. That is Leif and I am Scott Stevens. We're here to bring you some college football action this Wednesday. For me, it's evening. For Leif, it's afternoon. And yeah, it's been a while since we've talked about college football. Been a lot of good college basketball, and we've been a little bit busy ourselves with finals and everything. So we appreciate everyone's support of hanging with us with the fluctuating schedule. So we should be good to go now with what we're bringing for you. So we'll just recap one of the games from last weekend. The most important one for us, at least in our eyes, was BYU at Coastal Carolina. So we have a preview. We have a recap of that one. Some news to delve into. We'll spend a lot of time here in the news because we're a week before conference championships for football conferences, and we also have the college football playoff, which is upcoming, and we are now on our third week of playoff rankings. So things are starting to solidify a little bit, and we'll see how things play out with the conference championships. But we have some scenarios for teams that could potentially make said college football playoffs. So it's going to be a fun news segment there, and then we'll kind of go away a little bit from the previews for this weekend because the slate of games is there's nothing really pressing that needs to have a huge preview for it. We'll definitely give you picks and some insight as to why we're picking those games. We have a long slate of games to pick, but in terms of in-depth previews, we're going to kind of take a step away from that for right now and get back to that when conference championships roll around, excuse me. So without further ado, we'll jump right into our one preview from last weekend, and that was BYU traveling to Coastal Carolina in a game that came together really last minute. It came together on a Thursday, and they played on Saturday. So BYU then had to travel all the way across the country to South Carolina to play that game. And Coastal Carolina was able to squeak out of there with a win, 22-17. What did you make of this matchup? It was a fun one.
Well, first off, I was just really happy they made it happen. Like, they had the anywhere, anytime, and then there was a lot of, they don't mean that because they didn't play the Pac-12. Speaking of BYU, and then they made this happen on short notice. So I was pleased to see it because they needed to. It didn't work in BYU's favor. BYU ended up losing this game to Coastal Carolina, but both teams needed to make a statement in order to have any legitimacy as a contender in the college football playoff landscape. And it had to be done. So they made it happen. And then as for the game, my big takeaway is I felt like Coastal Carolina was just more physical in this game. And they dominated time of possession, limiting the amount of possessions for Zach Wilson. It was about 38 minutes to 22. That's substantial in a college football game. And that really, really was the key in the game. They were dominating time of possession. They took away the big play, even though BYU outgained them in terms of yardage. Time of possession and physicality proved the difference in my eyes.
Yeah, I think another point to add is that Coastal won the turnover battle 2-1. Ended up being a huge difference in the game, giving Coastal an extra possession to operate there. One of the things that stood out to me is I actually totally agree with what you said about making the game happen and all of that. Coastal Carolina was ranked 18 coming into this matchup. BYU was 13. Both kind of in desperate need of legitimacy in the eyes of the college football playoff. Their rankings have actually now completely flipped. They're both BYU's now 18 and Coastal Carolina's 13. So really interesting to see that. But a huge thing that stood out to me in this game is the fact that Coastal Carolina's offensive line is tiny. They average about 5'9" in height and about 250, 260. But they just body people off of the line. And they proved that they can move BYU off the line of scrimmage and dominated that aspect of things. They were able to run the ball. They only had like 70, I think, passing yards in this game. Coastal Carolina did. So very impressive to see that undersized offensive line kind of say, we will not be intimidated by these big Cougar defensive linemen. And they were able to provide a spark there of moving the football on the ground. What do you make of the final play in this one? Because it really did come down to the wire.
Well, first off, that was a great throw. Just like an absolute rocket, but you have to go to the end zone. It was really good tackling. Like I thought it was a really awesome play, and like it was one of those plays that college football is a game of inches, and it proved that. We've had a few of those games. Most notably, in my eyes, was Penn State and Indiana, where the ball could have been in, could have been out. This one was just a beautiful form tackle, but in BYU's game plan. You got to run that. Dax Milne's an excellent receiver, but you can't stop 4 yards short and try to get 3 or 4. And he got tackled at the 1. And I felt bad because it was a nicely executed play, but I think that in that instance you have to go to the end zone. And then one other thing I just wanted to commend Coastal Carolina on is we talked about how they had to defend Liberty's mobile quarterback. Zach Wilson's a whole different deal, but he's still someone you really got a game plan for. And having only 2 days to do so, come out with a really good game plan to limit them, though they limited time of possession. But even in the time where they were defending, they did a good job limiting him from huge plays.
Yeah, it really came to fruition just how much Zach Wilson's capable of in that final drive. They got the ball with like 50-some seconds left, down by 22-17 in that score line, and they were able to get the ball all the way down to the 30-yard line in that time frame and just pushing the ball downfield and making explosive plays. Gunnar Romney went up top for a pretty spectacular catch to cross them over the midfield threshold. And then, yeah, I just completely agree with you. I think it was a lack of – not a lack of awareness, but just a lack of execution to not get that ball all the way into the end zone. You can't expect to break a tackle when there's 3 guys on that receiver. Coastal Carolina was just basically playing a wall that started on the goal line, and if they threw it short, they were going to rally and make the tackle, and that's exactly what they did. So that ball has to go up into the end zone, and I would be pretty frustrated if I were a Cougar fan. You went all the way across the country on short notice to go play that game, and you're kind of expecting your team to be the one that's has the upper hand in the legitimacy factor, and then you walk away empty-handed. Still tremendously done by BYU. I will compliment them on making that happen, making that trip, something that not a lot of teams would have done. So kudos to them. But a truly incredible game last weekend that came together on a whim.
I mean, let's go Coastal. We've been talking about them since week 1 of this season, so we're early to this train. But they proved they're legit, and I think this game has more meaning than just that they were trying to get an outside puncher's chance. Now that they probably won't make the college football playoff now, but Coastal Carolina can schedule another game and get themselves a New Year's Six, and that's feasible if they win another bigger game, and that wasn't possible beforehand.
Yeah, they have a matchup lined up with Louisiana, who's been in another top 25 in the Sun Belt Conference Championship, which we will get to here in a little bit. The one thing I didn't mention in the intro, we'll just do a quick rundown of the top 7 teams that played last week, and just kind of show you how they held serve. That was the recap of BYU at Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina getting the win 22-17 in a really fun one there that took place last weekend. All right, top 7. Alabama stuck it to LSU. So a revenge game for them. The LSU came in and kind of manhandled them in Bryant-Denny Stadium last year. So they went into Death Valley this year and hung 55 on the Tigers. Final score of 55-17. What do we make of this Alabama team, just real quick?
Well, I think they're just super explosive in all cylinders. I mean, DeVonta Smith had over 200 yards in the first half. And then we talked about our Heisman contenders, and they have Mac Jones and Najee Harris. So, you got 3 of the best players in college football, and they already had lost Jalen Waddle. Their defense is coming along is probably the bigger story in my eyes in terms of their legitimacy. But LSU is not very good this year. I don't really read into this win being dominant, even though it's kind of a rivalry. I expected it to be this way, and I think they're just holding serve and gearing up for bigger games to come, namely Florida.
Yeah, Notre Dame struggled a little bit early. They were down actually in the second quarter to Syracuse. That was only 7-3, but they rallied and ended up winning that game 45-21. Clemson kind of laid the hammer down on Virginia Tech 45-10 in a primetime performance there with Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit on the call on ABC. We get to the ones where Scott decided to go aggressively against the top 5 teams. Ohio State just absolutely destroyed Michigan State, even though they were shorthanded. Final score of 52-12 in that one. Yeah, what do you have to say to me, at least, in terms of that upset pick?
I mean, it's kind of like what I did with basketball. You picked with your heart, not your head. And I told you, I said on the show that, sometimes you got to do with the heart, and it backfires a little bit. So the head, I would have gone with the head. Ohio State wasn't going to struggle twice in a row, and Michigan State I don't think was going to pull 2 upsets in a row. That was my logic. But I honestly I don't think it was a bad pick. The Auburn pick against Texas A&M was not a bad pick.
Yeah, that transitions us beautifully. Texas A&M needed a fourth quarter rally. I was hopeful for a while with my upset pick there to beat Auburn. Final score 31-20. Auburn. There was a play in this game where the Auburn defensive linebacker, I think actually had a pick in his hands, like literally not even fully extended the arms, and it hit both of his hands. It bounces up into the air past him into the arms of a Texas A&M wide receiver for a touchdown. And so that basically takes a turnover away and puts 7 points on the board, just halted all Auburn momentum. They were playing very well in this game up until that point, and then they just couldn't.
Auburn probably, I bet you Bama fan or Georgia fans are like, oh, you deserve that after that one where they botched the pick and Ricardo Lewis runs under it, the ball doesn't even see it, catches it, game winner. Right. I think that was a long time coming. At least Georgia fans would think so.
Yeah, karma definitely caught up with them there on that one. But a really good game there in the SEC. Texas A&M was able to rally late and hold serve. And then Florida struggled a little bit again, actually, this week against Tennessee. They only won 31-19. And so they've had a few times now where they're a little bit sluggish on both sides of the football. So that's something to watch with that huge matchup with Alabama looming in the SEC title game. And then Cincinnati was off last week. They were on their bye. So that's kind of the overview of the top 7 that took place last week, and we'll just skip right past. Scott picked both Ohio State and Texas A&M. We've covered that enough. But with that being said, we do have pick results. I was down 1 coming into this week. I was 28-18 overall. Leif was 29-17, and Leif got another game up on me. 5-3 I went. He went 6-2, so he's back up to a 2-game lead.
I just want to say the other game I missed. So I missed Indiana and Wisconsin. I didn't have a feel on that one. The other game I missed, I purposely took Washington. So I didn't. I'm a Stanford fan, and I was like, I'm going to keep karma out of this, my bias out of this, and I put some good karma, and Stanford won. So I'm not even mad about that one, not one bit.
You love to see it. You love to see it work out that way for you. Leif, you're now 35-19 on the year, my friend. Congratulations, and I'm 33-21. So we're gonna have to mix some things up this week if I'm gonna have a chance to catch you.
Yeah, the championship week's gonna be a big one.
Yeah, I know. There's gonna be some fun ones there for sure. And with that being said, we'll move into our news, which we have a ton of that for you. Already 2 massive cancellations for this week. Ole Miss and Texas A&M have canceled their game. So Texas A&M is the 5th team in the country. They now do not have a matchup this weekend. They will play Tennessee next week in lieu of playing for the SEC title game. So they have one next week, but they're now short a matchup this week. So big news there. And there was a lot of rumors going around that because of that and this cancellation, the Ohio State versus Michigan cancellation, that it would make a whole lot of sense for both teams to schedule that game of Ohio State and Texas A&M. It would be a huge matchup, number 4 versus number 5, something that we haven't really seen this late in the season with that much playoff implication on the line. It's not really looking like that's going to happen, but there's talks of confirming changes in the Big Ten's policies to allow a 5-team, a team that has 5 games instead of 6 to be eligible to play for the Big Ten title. So as of right now, that cancellation of Ohio State and Michigan would limit Ohio State's games to 5, so they would have been ineligible to play for the Big Ten title. Excuse me. What do you make of all of this and all of this circulation happening? And as of now, it's looking like Ohio State's going to be able to play because the Big Ten's going to change their mandate, but that's not set in stone yet.
Well, first and foremost, I really hope to see Ohio State and Texas A&M. I'm a little bit dubious of that happening. I just don't think either program wants to risk their chances. And then as for the Big Ten's policy, I think they're going to change it. I think Ohio State makes them too much money not to, and to effectively eliminate them from 1 Big Ten championship game and 2, presumably the college football playoff if they were to win. And then the bigger issue here is 6 was arbitrary, like it was an arbitrarily decided number. And so I feel like a lot of people can have a claim that, oh, who cares if it's 5 or 6? It wasn't their fault that 2 of these games got canceled. That like two of the Maryland got COVID and canceled one of the games. Michigan got COVID and canceled the other, and then the other game that they missed was I'm missing one, but Ohio State missed one game. And anyway, I think that they're going to say there's too much money riding with the Buckeyes to effectively impose the rules and stick it to them to eliminate them. I think the Big Ten has the rest of the Big Ten has a legitimate gripe and say, hey, what if Michigan football, what if Penn State football, Wisconsin football, some of these traditional big boys that are having down years, were 5-0 and looking at this, would they still do it? I don't know. But I don't think there's a way that in a year where there's limited money anyway, that the Big Ten is going to say we don't want a representative.
Yeah, I think most importantly is either way the Big Ten's going to have to break their protocols. If they schedule this Texas A&M Ohio State game or any other non-conference, like out-of-conference game that's breaking their protocol they originally stated of no Big Ten school will travel outside of their conference to play a football game. So if they want to make that step happen and have Ohio State play their 6th game this week against a non-Big Ten school, then they're going to have to break that protocol. And if they don't want that to happen, they're going to have to break their protocol of allowing Ohio State to play with only 5 games for the Big Ten title. So some interesting developments here. I've seen a couple sources that of saying that they're not definitely, but all rumors are pointing to that they do change their mandate of 6 to 5, which would allow Ohio State 2 weeks to essentially to prepare for a Northwestern team that's clinched the Big Ten West. So yeah, there's a whole lot going on here with this implication of around this Ohio State team, because as of right now, they're sitting there at 5-0, probably one of the best teams in the country. And if they don't play for a Big Ten title and they don't schedule another game and they end 5-0, do you see them having a shot at making the college football playoff?
I still do, just because of the quality of the team. And in a year, if they were like, I don't know, I feel like this is a down year in college football, quite frankly. Like we've only had 1 week so far this year, and that was when Notre Dame played Clemson and Florida played Georgia. And we talked about how both of those could potentially be elimination games. Typically, there's a few of those throughout the season, and we haven't had many of those. So that means that it's pretty clear cut who is a real contender. And to eliminate one of the clear contenders from contending in it based off a 5-0 record, obviously that's less than optimal in terms of game sample and opportunities to lose or to help themselves with wins. But I just don't think that even if they are 5-0 that they get eliminated unless they're Northwestern, if they were to win, was not resounding. Like if they squeaked one out, then I don't know. But I feel like if they're to win comfortably and 5-0, I don't think they're going to be penalized.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. We're kind of jumping the gun a little bit and getting to our playoff scenarios a little bit early. The third playoff rankings were released last night. Really, the only change that I think is notable to point to is that Cincinnati actually fell in the rankings from number 7 to number 8, and Iowa State with 2 losses jumped them. That was something that I was a little bit upset about. Truth be told, I know that Cincinnati hasn't played in the last 2 weeks, so there wasn't anything to build off of in terms of momentum for the committee to put them up higher. But with that being said, I don't know how you can put a 2-loss Iowa State team ahead of this Cincinnati team, because Iowa State lost to Louisiana in week 1. So let's not get it twisted that this Iowa State team has had its flaws, even though they're going to play for the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, I think Cincinnati, no fault of its own, has been penalized just by not being able to play games. And I wonder if that would be the case if Ohio State wasn't at 4, which is such a big spot in it. If they were at 6 or something, I don't know if they'd be penalized the same way and actually drop. So I wonder what their policy is of like, did they see something from? And I listened to the interview from the Big Ten commissioner who's in charge of this whole thing. And he said that it was more just something about how Iowa State was playing than Cincinnati being punished. But it's hard to imagine a scenario that if Cincinnati had won those 2 games, no matter how convincingly or unconvincingly, that they would have dropped.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that for sure. I think you cannot say that Iowa State isn't playing good football right now. They're a lock for the Big 12 championship. I do believe they're a good team, but I think I think you have to err on the side of undefeated Cincinnati in that scheme of things. It's just one of those other gut punches to a group of 5 team that says you will never be viewed as high as some of these other teams. So it's intriguing. It's intriguing to see that happen. But with that being said, we've hinted at a lot of these conference championships that are matched up already. Let's give you all a rundown of what some of these are looking like that we have to look forward to, not this week, but next week. Alabama versus Florida will be taking place for the SEC title game. Probably one of the biggest title games that there will be. Alabama's just looked dominant throughout their course of the year, but Florida has that explosive offense that can hang with anyone. Huge offensive potential in this football game. It's going to be one of the best games of the year between Florida and Alabama. What do you make of that matchup?
I mean, yeah, it really is who can get more stops. And Florida right now is not looking good defensively, and Alabama is starting to trend in the right direction defensively after a shootout with Ole Miss, and that since then they've kind of slowed down opposing offenses. So, I mean, Alabama right now, in my eyes, is looking like the best team in the country. But things can change. Obviously, it's one big game. Alabama, I would assume, is a touchdown favorite in this game, though, just because their defense is a little better and their offense obviously is scoring at an electric pace themselves.
We have a massive rematch in terms of the ACC title game. Clemson and Notre Dame are both slated in there to play in a rematch of a double overtime game that happened earlier on in the year in South Bend. Just humongous implications here as well. We'll get to some of these in the playoff scenarios a little bit later on, but Clemson has a chance to prove that with Trevor Lawrence, they're a better team than Notre Dame, and Notre Dame has a chance to beat a Clemson team twice in a year, which is something that I don't think anyone's done in the past at least 6 years, I would say. So huge implications for this one for both schools.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I'd say, the biggest game in college football, because we talked about how when the first time they played, it was the biggest game to that point. And I'd say this one's even bigger, because if Clemson were to beat Notre Dame, that causes a lot of disarray. But that's kind of what most people expect at this point with Trevor Lawrence being back. And if Notre Dame were to beat Clemson again, Clemson's out. And that allows Florida or Texas A&M. And, we're going to have all these situations and computations coming up for you. But it obviously enormous implications of this game, and you see 2 of the best teams in the country, and that's always a fun thing to do no matter what. Absolutely.
We touched on the Big 12 title game. It's going to be Iowa State versus Oklahoma. They've already played in their season as well, so this is another rematch game. It's going to be another fun one. I think this is going to be a little bit more higher scoring. Oklahoma can score with anybody, and Iowa State has such a good trio on offense. It's just you're interested to see what happens here. It's not necessarily playoff implications. I don't think either of these teams with a win will make the college football playoff. I think both have been eliminated. But with that being said, there's still a ton of New Year's Six implications on the line for both these schools. And it's always fun to play for your conference championship. So a huge matchup there in the Big 12. We've touched on Louisiana and Coastal Carolina playing for the Sun Belt Championship. Cincinnati is matched up with Tulsa, who's actually in the top 25. They're ranked at 24 for the American Conference title. So that's another big proving ground for a Cincinnati team desperate for any sort of validation in their conference games. And then, as we know of right now, Northwestern will represent the Big Ten West, and we're still waiting to solidify who's going to play for the Big Ten East, whether that's going to be Ohio State or Indiana. Is still up in the air whether or not Ohio State's able to go due to those protocols. The Pac-12 is just very much up in the air. You have no idea who's going to win there. You have Colorado and USC both unbeaten in the South, and then you have pretty much an elimination game this weekend, which we'll get to in the Pac-12 North. So that's where we stand in terms of conference championships and what to look forward to for the following weekend. And now, as we've hinted to so much already this episode, we'll get to some playoff scenarios. The first scenario that I'm going to pose to you, Leif, is number 1, Alabama, number 2, Notre Dame, number 3, Ohio State, and number 4, Clemson. Basically what we see now just with Ohio State and Clemson flipped. Here's what I think would have to happen for that to transpire. Alabama beats Florida in the SEC title. Notre Dame would beat Clemson again in a super close game, like just a squeaker in the ACC, title game. Or you can even flip-flop that. Like Clemson beats Notre Dame in that same kind of squeaker game, like just super close. Both teams would go. And then Ohio State plays for the Big Ten title and wins. What do you think of that?
I'd be curious to see if a 2-loss Clemson team would make it. If they were to beat Notre Dame, I'd be very confident both teams make it. I wonder if you could get Texas A&M in there for it, or if Clemson were to lose twice. Of that scenario, that's kind of the 4 teams that I want to see go and play. I think they're the best 4 teams in college football, and I don't think it's terribly close, to be honest. If are we asking who we think is going to win based off this, or just how likely this is?
Yeah, just basically how likely this is. Yeah.
I think this is very likely. I think that, like, you present a good point, that even if Clemson loses and it's a really close game, they have a chance. And if they win, this is pretty much a lock, assuming that Ohio State's able to go. Because I think Alabama, even with a loss to Florida, would still make it, and that would make Florida come in and one of the other teams would be bumped out. So I feel pretty confident this is the 4.
Yeah, that's my last scenario for you. That's going to just throw everything into pure chaos. Just wait. It's going to be so fun once we get to it. All right. So the second one is Notre Dame, actually the number 1 team, followed then by Ohio State, and then Florida, and then Alabama. So with this being the scenario, would be Notre Dame not blowing out, but beating Clemson handily again. Florida beating Alabama in the SEC title game, which is very possible. And Ohio State winning the Big Ten. So that would – I kind of ranked it as this because I don't see how you could put Florida below Alabama if they beat them in the SEC championship game. So that's why I had Florida at 3, Alabama at 4. And then because you can't put Alabama higher than Notre Dame or Ohio State, who would have conference titles.
Yeah, no, that this is a legitimate possibility. And it really – I think Florida is the one team that can really cause trouble in this. In all of college football, honestly, I think if Florida wins, then everything becomes chaotic because there's 5 spots for 4. And I think Notre Dame and Clemson, obviously you got to see who wins that and how the game plays, because that's really important. But yeah, no, this possibility is very real and would be very scary to especially Ohio State. If they don't win convincingly and they only have 5 games, I could see there's a possibility. We talked about how they're likely, if they're undefeated, going to make it. And if Clemson wins and Notre Dame, I mean, this is a different situation, but Ohio State, Clemson, and Notre Dame have to be on high alert if Florida wins. Like, I feel like it's almost must win and must win big time if I'm those programs, because you don't want to be competing with Clemson, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. All 3 of them, one's got to go. And so Florida is kind of the joker. Like, they're the one that can cause a lot of issues within the college football playoff and make this committee have to really think.
Okay, so I got 2 more for you. We're going to go down to Alabama at number 1, Notre Dame at number 2, Texas A&M at number 3, and Cincinnati at number 4. Now, hear me out, because you're looking at me like I have 3 heads, but here's a very real scenario of which I can see this is a possible outcome that we see happen. Alabama blows out Florida in the SEC title game. Notre Dame beats Clemson handily in the ACC championship game. That would eliminate both Florida and Clemson in my eyes. Texas A&M wins out. They're probably in at that point if both those things happen. So that's a very real possibility. And then Cincinnati wins out and wins the American Conference. That's a huge thing to have that conference title under their belt, another notch in their resume. If Ohio State does not play for the Big Ten title and doesn't reschedule a game and they're sitting there at 5-0 without a conference championship game, it's just going to be up to the committee. What do you value more between a 5-win Ohio State team without a conference title or a Cincinnati team that has 10 or 11, 12 wins and a conference title? So this is a very legitimate conversation that you can have with these teams of what's happening. I do think this is a lot less likely just because we saw Cincinnati fall again, but behind Iowa State. So, but with that being said, if there's ever a time to slide in a group of 5 team into the playoff, why not have it be this year?
I don't think this is insane, and I think part of my look was I couldn't find it on my document for a second. So I apologize there. The one thing I will say is I don't know if a loss. You said that Notre Dame would beat Clemson handily in this, and obviously Ohio State at 5-0 doesn't could maybe it wouldn't meet requirements, maybe it would, and they don't get to play the Big Ten championship for whatever reason. Um, that makes it hard. But I would wonder if they'd consider a two-loss Clemson team over Cincinnati, just the way that the committee is prioritizing quality, what they presume is quality at this point, because Cincinnati's done nothing wrong, but yet are at number 8. And so there's no way Iowa State makes it, right? But if they're 2-loss and already ahead, then why wouldn't a 2-loss Clemson, who would be their only losses would be against a surefire playoff lock in Notre Dame? I would love this. This would be pretty awesome to see if Cincinnati, a group of 5 team, can make it. And this is, like you said, this is the best year you have a chance, because there are extenuating circumstances. And I'd love to see this happen. I think this is the least likely of the ones so far, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, definitely not impossible. And I'm going to throw one last final one at you, and it's not going to be on the document, so don't go looking for it. But with that being said, what happens in your eyes if Florida beats Alabama, if Clemson beats Notre Dame, and Ohio State is undefeated with a Big Ten title, and you have all 5 of those teams vying for that for those 4 spots? What do you make of that? And I think that's the purest chaos form for the committee, because you would have a 1-loss Alabama, a 1-loss conference champion in Florida, a 1-loss conference champion in Clemson, and a 1-loss Notre Dame, who lost in both of those 1-loss Alabama and Notre Dame's lost in their conference championship game, and then an undefeated conference champion in Ohio State. I don't see how you could possibly leave one of those out, but what would be your thinking around that one?
Yeah, this is the one that I was starting to articulate earlier. And to be honest, I don't know what you do. I think the locks are the conference champions. And I'll say the 2 that beat the others. So I'd say Florida. I'm not saying this in ranking, but I would say that Florida, because they won the SEC championship and beat Alabama, is in. And I think Clemson, who beat Notre Dame in the ACC championship, is in. And then you're deciding between 3 of the biggest brands in college football, between Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State, which is great, because you don't want one of these type of situations where you got a huge name and then you got a Cincinnati type, where you feel like the huge name is going to win regardless. It feels like David and Goliath for the committee. And in this case, if Ohio State has 6, let's say, so if they had that game, would that be 5 or 6 games? So
that would be 6 for them.
That would be 6. So I'd have a hard time leaving out an undefeated team. So for this purpose, I would say that Ohio State's in, and then Alabama and Notre Dame, one of those 2 teams isn't going to make it, because and it just becomes who played better in their championship game loss. Even if Alabama were to lose by 10 and Clemson and Notre Dame lost in overtime, I think that Notre Dame's got a better win than Alabama does on the year. Alabama's best win is Georgia, and I guess Texas A&M, but that was really early in the year. Notre Dame beat Clemson. So it really, to me, would depend who is better in that championship game, and I'm sure they have other factors. And honestly, I wouldn't be too stunned if they say, Ohio State, you've played 6 games, but you haven't really beaten anyone, because the Big Ten is down this year. And so your best win was Indiana, who's a really good team. But that doesn't look as good as Alabama or Notre Dame. So I could see it going one of those 2 ways. The way of Ohio State, you just didn't do enough this year, and I'm sorry that coronavirus and your conference didn't do this. Or they put Ohio State in for being undefeated, and whoever had a worse loss is out of the championship games.
Yeah, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. It's going to come down to, did Clemson beat Notre Dame handily? Because if they beat Notre Dame handily, the only argument that's going to be said is, we lost to you in double overtime and we didn't have our best player, Trevor Lawrence. And so that would immediately take Notre Dame out of consideration, in my opinion. That would be, you would say you won over a handicapped Clemson team, and if Clemson can come out and beat them by 20, something crazy like that, I would say Notre Dame's not going to make the playoff. If that scenario would happen, they'd take Ohio State undefeated with a Big Ten title over that 1-loss Notre Dame team. And with that being said, I think Alabama can probably handle a 10-point loss. I'm just going to go out and say it, just with how dominant they've looked throughout the course of the year. Yeah, they played Texas A&M and Georgia early, but they blew both of them out. And so it's really telling to see where this team's at. And I think when you compare them to anyone else in these four, they're still probably better than all four of them, in my opinion, just as of right now. So I do think Florida can win the game. I'm not saying that they can't. I'm just saying I think Alabama is a lot more safe without a loss as of right now than Notre Dame is in my eyes, because I think there's a lot more likelihood that Clemson blows out Notre Dame than there is of Florida blowing out Alabama. So that's basically what it boils down to in my eyes.
I agree there. I think that if they were on equal footing, which I don't think they necessarily are, because obviously Alabama's ahead of them, that if the losses were lopsided, and I don't think Alabama gets blown out. So I don't think that really comes into it. So I think Alabama is pretty much a lock. I would say their percentages, even with a loss, is still above 50%.
Yeah.
And that's obviously a really good place to be, because if they win, they're in.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for our predictions. We'll let the teams do the talking on the fields and during the conference championship games. Just have those in the back of your mind. It's going to have huge implications on what's happening when you got the top teams in the country that are going to play one another. So it's going to be a truly tremendous weekend next weekend. And with that being said, we do have a good slate of games for you this weekend, which we're going to move into our picks now for them. We're going to start things off in the SEC. We just talked about them. The number one Alabama team is traveling to Arkansas and Felipe Franks and company. Do you think it's going to take place at noon Eastern on ESPN? Any trouble for the Crimson Tide here against Felipe Franks and the Razorbacks?
No, I think Felipe Franks may be able to put on points, but it's just not enough. And we saw Arkansas play Florida and give up 63. So I don't think that they're going to be able to put up enough points compared to what Alabama is going to put up on them, which very well could exceed 60.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. It looked like you were thinking a little bit there. It looked like you were running the possibility of the Arkansas upset. I would have jumped all over that one. But no, I'm gonna go Alabama big in this one. I just think they've got way too much talent. Their defense is getting way better each and every week, and so I'm just gonna roll with the Crimson Tide. I don't think you see them tested very much in this game. The top 20 matchup that we have this weekend is number 17 North Carolina taking on number 10 Miami. That's going to be 3:30 Eastern time on ABC. That's not really playoff implications. Neither one's eligible for the ACC title game. So what do we make of this matchup, and who do you think is going to win? It's probably the third best team in the ACC. This is like a third place game essentially.
This one's really hard because Miami gives you a really good performance, and then they give you an eking out against a subpar team, and they do that consistently. And North Carolina has done something similar, but of late they've played pretty well, and even in their loss to Notre Dame, it was a competitive game. So I'm going to go with North Carolina. I think that Sam Howell and company, and they've got really good running backs. They've got playmakers on the outside. I think that they have more offensive firepower. And the defense of Miami is short-staffed. I think they had a key injury on the outside. Their star, Gregory Rousseau, isn't playing. He opted out. I think that there's a good chance that it comes down to who can score more. They're not going to get stops, and North Carolina is well-suited in those type of games.
Yeah, I agree with you. I got my baby blue on. I swear it's not on purpose, but I'm gonna go North Carolina as well in this game. I picked them over Notre Dame, and that didn't really go well for me. So I'm just kind of my revenge tour. I'm picking them again. Hopefully they don't let me down in this one. I just haven't seen a ton out of Miami. Truth be told, I just De'Aaron King's a beast, but outside of him, I'm not really sure who they have on both sides of the football. And like we touched on earlier, we previewed one of their games. It's which defense is going to show up for that team? Are they going to be disciplined, or are they going to be trying to do way too much and creating penalties and bad scenarios for their team? So I think there's a huge implication on which Miami team comes to play. We also haven't even touched on, they haven't played a game in 2 weeks. So you're not really sure who's there for Miami either. So I'll roll with North Carolina in this one to spring the upset there, 17-10. The Pac-12 North championship game essentially is down this week between Oregon, who has 2 losses, and Washington, who has one loss. So if Washington wins, they're a lock. If Oregon beats Washington, they will have the tiebreaker over them, and Oregon will go play for the Pac-12 championship game. That's going to take place at 4 Eastern time on Fox. Who you got winning this and representing the Pac-12 North?
Well, I can see a possibility where neither of these two teams represent the North and the Pac-12 necessarily. And obviously, these are two favorites, but I'll give you that situation. I think that is, if Washington were to win this game, they would be one loss. And if they were to lose their second game and Stanford were to win out, then Stanford could represent the North. That said, I don't know if that's horribly likely due to schedules. So in this game, I'm going to go with Oregon. I'm going to go with Oregon because I think that their quarterback, I'm not a big believer in Tyler Shutt, and I've talked about that on here before, is better than Dylan Morris of Washington. And I think that their run game can produce results even against this type of defense, because we saw Stanford exposed Washington's defense. They ran for nearly 200 yards last week with Austin Jones. And I think Oregon has the playmakers on the outside where they have to respect and not stack the box as much so. And I think that they've had a little time to get over their loss and lick their wounds a little bit. And then Washington's a little depleted. They don't have Puka Nacua or Bynum on the outside. And I just didn't see anything inspiring performance out of Washington. And that's not saying Oregon's great, but I just think they have the pieces that can expose a Washington defense that is usually stout and the athleticism on defense to limit big plays, which is what Washington thrives on.
Yeah, I agree. I hate to do this to you, but the Pac-12 championship game is scheduled on December 18th, which is a Friday. So I think this is the last regular season game for the Pac-12 and in terms of what's happening there.
So what you're telling me is they can't. Oh, I see what happened here.
Because Stanford will play another game, but it'll be next week.
Yeah. No, it's because they didn't get to play Washington State. Now, I in my head I decided that was a victory because Jaden DeLora wasn't playing, and I knew they were 2-2, but I was like, well, they get 2 more games, but one of those was canceled. Yeah, no, that makes more sense. I was like, why haven't I heard this in some of these things? But in my head, it worked, and it didn't actually.
No worries. We all love those scenarios of just having things happen when you really, really want it to be the case. With that being said, I have IDK written down, and I still really don't know who's gonna win this game. I'm gonna go with Oregon. I think just because they have, like you touched on, they have the more solidified pieces. My biggest gripe with Oregon so far in the year is where the heck has CJ Verdell been? He's probably their best player. He's a tremendous running back, and he just isn't getting the touches. I know they have a balanced backfield, and they have 3 guys that can all carry the football, and Travis Dye and Habibi Likio. But with that being said, you have to realize that CJ Verdell is your best running back. And so, like, with him not getting those touches, it just really doesn't make sense to me in terms of what's happening with Oregon. He was their guy last year, and so I don't know if they've just seen more out of Dye and Habibi Likio. But with that being said, I think Oregon, like you touched on, has more talent on both sides of the ball. With Puka Nacua and company being out for Washington, I don't see them having enough firepower on the outside to keep Oregon balanced. So I'll go with Oregon as well to win this one. I think it's going to be a close game, and it's kind of a shame that either one of these two teams is going to represent the Pac-12 North, because I really don't think they're the 2 best teams in the division. But with that being said, someone's got to play for it. So I'll roll with Oregon in that time frame. The best chance to play for the Pac-12 South Division is USC. They're up to number 15 in the latest college football playoff ranking. They're traveling to UCLA. They actually get a primetime slot on 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit calling that one. Who you got in this one, and why?
I think you got to go with USC in this game. I mean, I know it's a rivalry. It's the Rose Bowl and everything that comes along with that. And it might be really competitive. I just think that USC's got too many weapons, and they underperformed early in the year. So I have to believe that they can do better. And we saw signs of that. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown had 4 touchdowns in the first quarter, which I just don't get it. Like, some teams don't get that many drives in a quarter. They have weapons, obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyler Vaughns, Drake London. Keaton Slovis looked better. He threw 5 touchdowns in that game as opposed to 5 in his first 3 games. And then as for UCLA, I just think their defense is not very good. And they might be able to put up points on USC, but I think USC's got the best mix of offense and defense in the conference. At least defensive talent that has produced a little bit, because there's talent on Oregon and Washington we've talked about, but they have given up a lot of points in some of their games. So I'm going to go with USC in this one, and I think they'll probably end up representing the Pac-12 in some manner. I mean, obviously not in the playoff, but in some manner.
Yeah, I'm going to go USC too, and for one reason and one reason alone. Last weekend, we saw the emergence of Amon-Ra St. Brown. He scored 4 touchdowns in the first quarter against Washington State to put them up 28-0. So I'm going to roll with that connection between Slovis and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's probably the best receiver in the Pac-12, truth be told. And so I'm going to roll with him, and him gaining that confidence and that level of connection to score some of those touchdowns and have that emergence a little bit is huge for this USC team. It's something they needed to have. And this is their chance to prove they're the best team in the Pac-12 this year. That's quite frankly all this game boils down to. It's why they got slotted in there at the 7:30 time slot on ABC, the national notoriety. It's because no one really watches the Pac-12 games when they're scheduled at 10:30 Eastern time here. So it's a chance for that team to really show that they have what it takes to be the Pac-12 champion. And with that being said, I'm not sure that's such a great title this year with how the Pac-12 has been performing. But yeah, I'll take USC in this one. Our next game is.
Let me ask one real quick follow-up question.
Yeah,
if there were a 12-game season, who do you have winning the Pac-12, and what is the best record in the Pac-12? Because I don't see it being better than 8-4, maybe 9-3.
Yeah, I would say 9-3 is probably the ceiling. I think the South teams would be the same. I think maybe you could throw in Arizona State. But as of right now, you see Colorado and USC undefeated, and they're both ranked. So I'll go with those two as probably my favorites in the South. But I think Arizona State still is one of the better teams. Utah, just no. UCLA, no. Arizona, not really. In terms of the North, I think you could see Stanford emerge itself a little bit. I think you could see Washington State gain some traction a little bit with Delora. I don't know. Just each week, it looks like Oregon's regressing, and it just they just don't seem to have that next gear that they can go to just to have sustainable wins. And I don't know. I've seen a lot out of Oregon State even, and so it's just some interesting things to look out for. I don't think anyone does better than 9-3 though.
Yeah, no, I think the South. I think SC could even get 10-2 maybe. But I'd say 9-3 is probably the ceiling there. And then the North, I wouldn't be surprised if 7-5 wins it, and they just win the North games. Like I'm biased, and I will admit that openly. But in this take, I don't think it's a horrible claim to say that in Stanford's losses, that Davis Mills didn't play against Oregon, and now we're seeing Oregon is being fully exposed. And we said on this podcast that Stanford outplayed them in the first half, and it was like, okay, that's a fluke. But Jack West is nowhere near Davis Mills. Week 2 against Colorado, they lost by 3, and Davis Mills was in a 10-day quarantine that turned out to be unnecessary, but out of an abundance of caution and protocol, he wasn't there. So that the first half was the difference in that game. So even if you were to take those results and say, hey, go play now, and in the 2 games that he's really started, they've looked pretty good. And then Washington and Oregon have so much talent, it's hard to imagine them losing, 6 games. So 7-5 is really possible. You could get 3 teams at 7-5, and it's just tiebreakers to me. And then Oregon State, like you said, Jamar Jefferson's a stud, and they move the ball pretty well. I just don't know if I believe in their defense enough, but it's an interesting concept to think of because Pac-12 is known for cannibalizing itself. But this year would be even worse than usual, is what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could agree more with you there. Our next game that we're going to pick for you is based on tradition. It's based on service. It's a yearly tradition between service academies. College Game Day is going to be there this year. It's a yearly tradition for everyone involved. It's one of the games that you don't really want to miss in terms of college football this year. It's Army versus Navy. It's going to take place at 3:30 Eastern time on CBS. Who you got in this one?
I'll be honest. I haven't really watched either of them play other than BYU played, and they killed them. And I assume there's a lot of improvement going on This game's always good, though. It never really disappoints because of just the tradition, like you spoke of. I think that I'm going with Navy, though. I just think that I watched them play. They've played more good teams, and so I'm going to go with Navy. But I don't really have a great feel in this game at all.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go the opposite of you because I need to make one up, honestly. So I'm gonna go with Army. I don't think that they run the triple option anymore, which is kind of hype. So they might have an offense that doesn't necessarily need them to have the ball for 8 minutes of drive. But with that being said, we've touched on that this is a tremendous game. No disrespect at all to either of these two teams. Whenever they play, it's fireworks and it's fun to watch. And it's all about tradition and all that good stuff. But these are two teams that we never really hear a lot about. And like you touched on, Navy got blasted by BYU. So I'm gonna roll with Army and hope for the best in this one.
You're taking the favorite in that one.
Oh,
And,
let's go. See, I didn't even know.
I took Navy because I'd seen them and I was like, hey, they have some athletes on their team that I can believe they ran all right. I looked into it while you were talking there, and I feel bad. I like your pick more than my own, which is never a really good feeling.
Let's go. I need it bad. All right. A Wisconsin team that now has fallen to 2-2 and out of the rankings is traveling to number 16 Iowa. That'll take place at 3:30 Eastern time, either on Fox Sports 1 or the Big Ten Network. You got in this one?
I'm gonna go with Iowa. I think that there's a recipe to follow in when playing Wisconsin that Northwestern laid and Indiana followed as well, and that is pack the box even more than usual. And Graham Mertz is struggling. I don't think they've found their rhythm after returning from coronavirus. And so I'm going with Iowa. And then we talk about Wisconsin's struggles, but Iowa's quietly creeping up the rankings. They're a good football team that's only getting better. They played a tight game around Thanksgiving against Nebraska and didn't look great. And then their next week they played really well. So I'm gonna take Iowa.
Yeah, I'm going to go Iowa as well. I just think it's all about Graham Mertz in this game, and his inability to force the ball downfield in their last two really hurt Wisconsin. Just not really the same quarterback we saw in their first two games. I know it's really hard when you play and then you have a long layoff and you play again and you have another long layoff and just games not happening and all of this different things. There's a lot of uncertainty around Wisconsin. They only played 4 games. So I get all of that. But with that being said, they just haven't performed in some of their games. This year, they looked bad, quite frankly, against Northwestern. They didn't look great last week against Indiana. So I'll roll with Iowa in this one to continue to win and be ranked inside that top 25. Our next game is another Pac-12 South matchup with huge implications if Colorado can remain undefeated. Utah is traveling to number 21 Colorado. That game actually a few hours ago just got moved to noon Eastern time on Saturday on Fox. What do you got in this one?
I mean, I think we're going to agree here that Colorado is the favorite because Utah has very little quarterback play. I think Jake Bentley has drastically underperformed, though he didn't win the starting job. So I guess it's fair that it is a backup quarterback, but he's not good enough to win a game against a team like Colorado that has a balanced offense and has got some big playmakers on. Jarek Broussard's a really good running back, and Sam Neuer makes plays. So I'm going to take Colorado, and they're also their defense is really good. They got Lang and Lancaster who are really good. So I'm going Colorado, but the Utah defense is young and looks pretty good.
Yeah, it's an interesting game because I do think Utah hangs with them. It's a rivalry game. They're going to want to come out and have a good performance against a very good Colorado team. Quite frankly, I'm going to take Colorado because I think they'll win the game. But just watch out for Ty Jordan and Brant Kuithe for Utah, two guys that can make a difference on the offensive side of the ball. But with that being said, man, Jake Bentley just cannot take care of the football, and so you can't put all your eggs in that basket. And in terms of me picking the game, so I'll go with Colorado just because I think Bentley throws at least 2 interceptions, quite frankly. So I'll go Colorado in this one and a good one there to start your Saturday off on Fox. LSU traveling to Florida. We know LSU's been down this year, but they still have athletes. Do we see any issue with the Gators here against LSU?
They might give up some points, but they're going to score more points though. I mean, I think Trask had his one down game of the season last week, and now he plays a hurting LSU team. and they can put up some points, and they have to win this game to like, to keep pace in the playoff race. Like, they haven't moved at all. So, but they can't put a stinker out and then drop out. So I think they're going to come out firing, and I expect it's going to be like 50 at least for Florida.
Yeah, I'm gonna take Florida big as well in this one. I just, like you touched on, they're gonna score more. I think they will get scored on, but LSU's been so bad, and it's just I said to a couple of my friends after I saw how much LSU lost on the offensive side of the ball, I was like, they will not be above 500 last year, and that was before all of this coronavirus and things happened and all of that stuff. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything. I'm just saying that this is a team that was kind of destined to have this bad year with just how much they lost from that national championship run. So with that being said, I'm going to go Florida big to hold on to that sixth spot. And I think if they have some more good performances, they have every right to jump Texas A&M, even though they lost to them. We'll close out our picks with one last top 25 matchup. Number 9, Georgia's been a completely different team with the emergence of JT Daniels. They're traveling to number 25, Missouri. This is going to be noon Eastern on SEC Network. Who you got in this one?
Well, honestly, I'm surprised to see Missouri in there, but good for them. That said, Georgia, I said at the beginning of the year, all they had to do was play JT Daniels, and they would be a national title contender. So I still believe that. It's just too late now. So I'm taking Georgia in this one. I think they're going to be able to limit that really good Missouri offense enough to get the win. I think it might be a close game, but I think JT Daniels brings an element of a threat passing the ball that'll open up running lanes for Zamir White and company and get George Pickens involved. And that's huge for Georgia. It's a little too late, but I think they're going to move up in the rankings and play in like a New Year's Six type of bowl.
Yep, I'm going Georgia big, I think, in this one. I just think they've got too much going on for them. JT Daniels has looked great in his couple games that he started for Georgia. It's been a completely different team. The ability to get those guys, George Pickens and wide receivers, involved down the field is tremendous. It's something they didn't have, quite frankly. And so you wish you could see those rematches happen against Alabama, against some of these other teams, Florida, with Daniels at quarterback and having that ability to stretch the field. But like you touched on, it's just a little bit too little, too late. Still going to be a top 10 finish, I believe, for Georgia this season. They're a tremendous program. They'll be back, and hopefully we get to see that happen next year, since this is kind of a wash on eligibility with having Daniels play another year. But with that being said, I'll go Georgia big in this one. We don't have a game of the week for you because there's not necessarily something that stands out the most to me in terms of playoff implications, anything like that. So we're no scores, no nothing like that. We'll see what happens with these slated games, and we'll get back to you on Sunday for a recap for sure. But before then, we will have some college basketball that we'll preview for you this weekend. Not sure, as that date's still TBD on when Leif and I can swing that episode, but that'll be before Sunday for sure. Probably Friday. We still have to discuss. But yeah, that's going to do it for Leif and I on this episode of the College Sports Hive. Thanks again for sticking with us and waiting for your college football action. But there it was, and hope you enjoy it. And we'll do you have anything else to say before we sign off?
Yeah, just watch some of these good games. You got huge playoff implications, and then definitely tune in next week as we'll break down every scenario and our predictions of what the committee is going to do, barring each result. So that'll be a fun one. Check out the basketball. Keep watching all your sports. Stay safe and have some fun.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Couldn't say it better myself. So that's going to do it for Leif and I, and we'll see you all on Friday probably. All right, take care.
Adios.